Have you ever wondered why Japan, a country of 123 million people, feels so empty when you venture outside its major cities? Have you ever looked at a population map and noticed that nearly everyone seems to live in a single, narrow line stretching across the country? And here is the question that gets to the heart of it. What geographic forces have conspired to cram two-thirds of Japan's entire population into a corridor that makes up less than 10% of its land, leaving the rest of the country virtually empty? My name is Emma Chamberlain, and today on Infographics, we are going to explore one of the most unusual and interesting population patterns in the world. We are going to look at why Japan's population is so concentrated, why the rest of the country is relatively empty, and how mountains, oceans, currents, and centuries of history have shaped where people live. This is a story about geography, about climate, about trade routes, and about how the physical world shapes human settlement in ways that persist for centuries. Let us start with the numbers because they are genuinely astonishing. Japan is home to around 123 million people, making it the 11th most populous country in the world. It is also home to the world's second most populous island, Honshu, where more than 83% of the Japanese population lives. That is over 102 million people on a single island, which is more than the entire population of Germany or France. But when you look beneath the surface, you see something even more striking. The vast majority of Japan's population lives within a relatively small, linear corridor that runs across the center and east of the country. This line encompasses most of Japan's largest metropolitan areas, including Fukuoka, Kitakyushu, Hiroshima, Okayama, Takamatsu, Kobe, Osaka, Kyoto, Nagoya, Hamamatsu, Shizuoka, and, of course, the biggest of all, Tokyo. Roughly 80 million Japanese people live within this long but narrow line that extends for about 1,200 kilometers across an area that makes up less than 10% of Japan's total land area. That leaves the remaining 90% of the country significantly more sparsely populated. To put it in perspective, about 80 million people live in that small corridor, while only about 43 million people live in the rest of the country, which is more than 9 times larger. The average population density within this corridor is nearly 17 times greater than in the rest of Japan. That is one of the most astonishing regional population differences seen anywhere in the world. The corridor itself is even more densely populated than the crowded city-state of Vatican City, while the rest of Japan has an average density about the same as the U.S. state of Pennsylvania. Economically, the imbalance is even more extreme. This corridor accounts for an astonishing 70% of Japan's entire economy. So not only do most people live there, but most of the economic activity happens there too. It is the heart of the nation in every sense. This highly populated and economically powerful line has been referred to by many names. Sometimes it is called the Taiheiyo Belt, which means Pacific Belt in English, and other times the Tokaido Corridor. I will refer to it as the Taiheiyo Belt. In many ways, it is comparable to the Northeast megalopolis in the United States, the densely populated urban area running from Washington, D.C., through Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston. Geographically, the Taiheiyo Belt is a bit larger. If you placed it side by side with the Northeast, with Fukuoka where Washington, D.C. begins, the belt would extend well beyond Boston, with Tokyo placed roughly in central Maine. And with about 80 million people, it is significantly more populated than the Northeast megalopolis, which is home to only about 53 million people. This difference in population density and scale partly explains Japan's dramatically superior rail connectivity. The famous Shinkansen bullet train network connects the entire corridor, enabling rapid transport from Tokyo to Fukuoka in only about 3.5 hours. That is roughly half the time it takes Amtrak's Acela to cover a similar distance from Boston to Washington, D.C. When you have that many people living in a line, building high-speed rail makes economic sense in a way it does not in more spread-out regions. But this raises a fundamental question. Why does Japan's human geography look like this? Why do so many people live crammed together in this narrow line? And why is the rest of the country so empty? The answer lies in a combination of physical geography, climate, ocean currents, and historical developments that stretch back centuries. First, look at a topographic map of Japan's elevation. Japan is one of the most mountainous countries in the world, with about 73% of its total land area covered by mountains. That leaves only about a quarter of the country suitable for significant human habitation, in the few scattered areas of flat land where urban development is easier and more affordable. Since ancient times, this has restricted the Japanese people to living in close proximity to each other along coastal plains and across the few flatter areas in the interior. There are pockets of flat land found all across the country, from the west to the east, from the north to the south. But you will notice that the Taiheiyo belt follows what happens to be the three largest continuous areas of flat land anywhere in Japan. The Kenai Plain encompasses the cities of Osaka, Kobe, and Kyoto. The Nobi Plain encompasses Nagoya, and the largest of all, the Kanto Plain, encompasses the megacity of Tokyo. All three of these plains also have large rivers flowing through them, making them ideal centers for agriculture and supporting large populations. The Nagoya metropolitan area, crowded within the Nobi Plain, is Japan's third largest metro area, home to more than 9.3 million people. The Osaka metropolitan area, within the Kenai Plain, is the second largest, home to more than 19.3 million people. And the Tokyo metropolitan area, within the Kanto Plain, is the largest not only in Japan, but in the entire world, with more than 41 million people living there today. That is more than double the population of the New York City metropolitan area. Collectively, these three plains alone are home to nearly 70 million people, most of the population within the whole Taiheiyo belt, and indeed more than half of the entire national population. They have been the major population, economic, and political centers in Japan for centuries, dominating the rest of the country. But it is not just that they are the largest areas of flat land. The western side of Honshu, facing the Sea of Japan, has some flat areas too, but none are as large, and they have multiple other disadvantages that have always made them less attractive places to settle. For one thing, the Pacific side of Japan was blessed with significantly larger, deeper, and more useful natural harbors. Almost miraculously, Japan is home to not one, but two of the most incredible natural harbors anywhere on the planet. Harbors that are simultaneously huge, deep, exceptionally well sheltered, and directly connected to large, flat hinterlands that can support huge adjacent population centers. I am talking about Tokyo Bay and Osaka Bay, which, of course, are directly connected to the huge flat Kanto and Kenai plains. Tokyo Bay, in particular, is so comically overpowered from a commercial trade perspective that it alone handles around 350 million tons of seaborne cargo annually, comparable to the entire maritime trade volume of Italy combined. Think about that. One bay in one city handles as much cargo as an entire European country. While not quite as exceptional, Ise Bay, which connects to the Nobi Plain where Nagoya sits, is also world-class, being huge, deep, and fairly well sheltered, with the huge Nobi Plain directly adjacent. These three world-class natural harbors, just so happening to connect to the three largest flat plains, made them even more obvious centers to settle in order to capitalize on commercial trade and naval potential. The combination of flat land for building and deep water for ports is a geographic gift that few places on Earth possess. But beyond these three, the Pacific side of Japan has many other excellent natural harbors as well, including Kagoshima and Nagasaki bays on the Pacific-facing side of Kyushu, and Hiroshima Bay on Honshu. The western Sea of Japan-facing side of Honshu, by comparison, is nowhere near as jagged. It is significantly smoother, and, as a result, it has nowhere near as many useful natural harbors and ports as the Pacific side. The only notable harbors on that side are Mikuru Bay and the port of Niigata, but both are tiny fractions of the size of the massive natural harbors on the Pacific side, like Tokyo and Osaka bays. And neither is connected to a large flat plain in the interior that can support millions of people nearby to sustain trade. The Sea of Japan side of Honshu and the entire northern island of Hokkaido simply have nowhere near as ideal natural harbors to utilize for trade and commerce, on top of nowhere near as large plains to build cities in, compounding other disadvantages that make supporting huge populations even more difficult. And to make the Pacific side even more advantageous, it also has the Seto Inland Sea, which is, without coincidence, placed directly in the center of the Taiheiyo Belt. Because Japan's landmass is so mountainous, the islands have an abundance of water. But the dearth of flat land also means that nearly all of the rivers running through the interior are rough and full of rapids and waterfalls, making them completely unsuitable for interior navigation and trade. This is made even worse by the fact that most of the rivers do not even connect to each other. You cannot build a canal system when the terrain is that rugged. But what Japan does have that more than makes up for the lack of navigable rivers is the Seto Inland Sea, the largely enclosed body of water protected from the rest of the Pacific between the main islands of Honshu, Kyushu, and Shikoku. Between these main islands, there are only 4 narrow straits that connect the inland sea with the greater Pacific, which makes its water significantly calmer than anywhere in the surrounding ocean. While the tidal currents within the 4 narrow straits leading into and out of the sea can be strong and complex, the rest of the sea is exceptionally navigable, and it blesses Japan's geography with one of the largest internal seas for navigation and trade that can be found anywhere in the world. To give you just a sense of the Seto Inland Sea's scale, if you placed it over the northeast coast of the United States, it would stretch from Washington, D.C., beyond New York City, into southern Connecticut. That is a massive body of protected water. There are also around 700 separate, smaller islands that can be found dotted all across the Seto Inland Sea, several of them complete with their own incredible, deep natural harbors that provided abundant safe anchorage and stopovers for ships during storms, which made the whole body of water perfect for early maritime trade during the ancient and medieval eras. The sea also provides a moderating effect on the regional climate around it, to the extent that it is often referred to as Japan's Mediterranean, an area with year-round warm temperatures that supports year-round navigation and agriculture. This is not a small thing. In a world before modern heating, being able to grow food and move goods year-round was a massive advantage. During pre-industrial times in Japan, building roads across Japan's mountainous terrain to connect disparate flat areas together was extremely difficult. But the calm waters of the Seto Inland Sea provided a critical alternative for much easier and efficient sea-based transportation instead. It was essentially a natural highway. Even better, at the eastern edge of the sea, the presence of Awaji Island created the even further enclosed Osaka Bay within it, directly connected to the huge flat area of the Kenai Plain in the interior. Thus, from early on within Japan's history, the Seto Inland Sea became the critical maritime trade artery that connected the Kenai Plain in the Osaka Bay and all the other areas around its shorelines with the rest of Honshu to the east, including the Nobi and Kanto plains with their own ideal harbors, and with mainland Asia and Korea further to the west. All of this huge trade volume flowing through it transformed the Seto Inland Sea into the wealthiest area of Japan for centuries, which encouraged settlement around it and which, in particular, directly contributed to the massive population growth in the Kenai Plain that gave rise to Japan's early political center in Kyoto, and what eventually became the megaport city of Osaka. For centuries, it was Osaka that was the economic epicenter of Japan, because of all of these advantages. And by the time of the Tokugawa shogunate, all of Japan's feudal lords, known as daimyo, had established an office in the city that was known as Osaka Yashiki, which was among the earliest forms of banks in Japan, further reinforcing Osaka's early importance. And by the time of the Industrial Age, the other cities around the inland sea, like Kobe, Okayama, Takamatsu, Fukuyama, Hiroshima, and Kita, Kyushu, all developed into major industrial, shipping, and naval centers as well, carrying over the Seto Inland Sea's importance into the modern era and further solidifying the population concentration within what would become known as the Taiheiyo Belt that runs directly across it. After the Tokugawa shogun had managed to largely unify Japan in the early 17th century, the shogun decided to establish the seat of his power away from the historical imperial capital at Kyoto, towards the east at Edo, within the larger Kanto Plain. This was one of the most profound impacts on Japan's human geography and population pattern that has ever happened. The shoguns relocated their administrative center to Edo, which would later be renamed Tokyo during the 19th century, in order to distance themselves from the emperor in Japan's traditional nobility in Kyoto, so that they would not be overshadowed by them. They also saw the potential for rapid urban development in the large and expansive Kanto Plain that was still fairly underdeveloped by the time of the early 17th century. At that time, Edo was nothing but a small castle town that was probably only home to a few tens of thousands of people. But within only a century of Tokugawa shogun rule, with Edo as their de facto capital, by around 1700, its population had exploded to more than 1 million people, which transformed it from a small town into one of the largest cities in the world within only a couple of lifetimes. That kind of growth is almost unprecedented. Fueling this enormous growth of people in Edo and the Kanto Plain, and elsewhere along the modern Taiheiyo Belt during the Tokugawa era, was the shogunate's centuries-long policy that was known as Sankin Kotai, which required all of Japan's feudal lords, or daimyo, to alternate living between their domain and Edo every other year. The hundreds of daimyo at any given time in Japan were forced by this policy to maintain a lavish residence both at their homes and in the shogun's capital at Edo. And every other year, when the daimyo moved back and forth between them, they were forced to undergo expensive and lavish processions with their full entourages. For the shogun, the policy was a deliberate strategy to force the daimyo and their families into a state of surveillance in the capital, while the extreme financial burden of maintaining lavish mansions in both locations and moving back and forth between them every other year was both time and money that they could not spend on plotting to overthrow the shogun. Their frequent travel back and forth with their full entourages also incentivized road building and the development of inns and other facilities along the routes they took, which helped generate early economic activity along them. Over time, 5 primary routes were developed that the daimyo took between their domains and Edo, and the most used route out of all of them falls directly along the Taiheiyo Belt today, between Edo and the old imperial capital at Kyoto, which meant that this route became rapidly economically developed across the Tokugawa era into the 19th century, and was already the most developed part of the country, leading into the era of industrialization that accelerated its growth even further. Another major key to the puzzle that influences the location of Japan's population across the Taiheiyo Belt today is the presence of ocean currents, which dramatically influence Japan's regional climates. From the south, the Kuroshio Current functions in a similar manner to the Gulf Stream in the North Atlantic, carrying warm waters from the Philippines northward along the eastern shores of Japan. This current brings warm and moist air along with it, which highly contributes to the mild winters and humid summers that are experienced in Kyushu, Shikoku, and southeastern Honshu, basically immediately along the Taiheiyo Belt. And it is what keeps Tokyo in particular relatively warm for a city at its latitude. At the same time, an opposite oceanic current also comes down to Japan from the north, known as the Oyashio Current, a cold subarctic current that flows south from the Arctic Ocean through the Bering Strait, carrying frigid but nutrient-rich Arctic waters along with it. Almost immediately northeast of Tokyo Bay, the cold Oyashio Current collides with the warm Kuroshio Current, creating one of, if not the richest, fishery areas on the planet that has always been easy to capture and exploit from the relative safety of nearby Tokyo Bay to help support the population across the Kanto Plain. The combination of warm and cold currents creates upwellings that bring nutrients to the surface, supporting vast amounts of marine life. The cold air above the Oyashio Current contributes substantially to the colder climate that can be found in the northern island of Hokkaido and along the western coast of Honshu that faces the Sea of Japan. But there are a lot of other complex climatic effects going on here that make them even worse. A branch of the warm Kuroshio Current, known as the Tsushima Current, breaks off and flows into the Sea of Japan from the south. But during the winters, when cold and dry air originating from Siberia blows across the Sea of Japan, the cold air masses will pick up the moisture and warmth from the relatively mild Tsushima Current and become saturated. When that saturated air then hits the mountains in western Honshu and Hokkaido, it will rapidly cool and then dump an absolutely enormous amount of snow in the process, to the point that northwestern Honshu and Hokkaido are among the snowiest locations that can be found anywhere on the planet. It also means that eastern Honshu, which faces the warmer waters of the Pacific, along with Shikoku and Kyushu, experiences dramatically less snowfall than the western side of Honshu and Hokkaido, which suffer throughout the winter. An area of Japan that is literally referred to by the Japanese as the snow country. From a North American perspective, the climate found in Hokkaido is more similar to the area around Lake Ontario, like Toronto, Buffalo, and Rochester. The northern and western sides of Honshu are generally more comparable to coastal New England and the mid-Atlantic. While the eastern side of Honshu, along with Shikoku and Kyushu, is much warmer and rainier, and is more comparable to Georgia and South Carolina. Northwestern Honshu is so snowy because of this effect during the winter that the city of Aomori in the north of the island holds the distinction of being the snowiest major city in the world. Its 265,000 people experience a whopping average of 8 meters or 26 feet of snowfall every winter, nearly 6 times as much snowfall as Minneapolis experiences on average in the United States. Snowfall gets so deep in some parts of the snow country that some buildings are designed and built with a special entrance through their second story. All kinds of special infrastructure considerations have to be made in the snow country. Residents have to remove the piles of snow that accumulate on their roofs in order to prevent their weight from crushing and caving in. Streets are often lined with covered sidewalks to make sure that residents can still get around in the winter. Streets are equipped with sprinklers that deploy warmer groundwater to keep them passable by melting snow. And in some towns, people even used to tunnel paths through the snow in order to get to each other's homes. All of this means that development in the snow country is just more expensive and time-consuming than it is elsewhere in Japan. And thus, when you put this all together, it is pretty easy to see why the area that became the Taiheiyo Belt is by far the most densely populated part of the country, and why it has been for a very long time now. The Taiheiyo Belt has the advantages of the Seto Inland Sea for a large, calm, and easily navigable body of water to facilitate trade, movement, and commerce. It encompasses by far the best natural harbors that can be found in the islands, and some of the best anywhere in the entire world, like Tokyo and Osaka Bays, both of which are directly connected to large flat hinterlands in the Kenai and Kanto Plains, with another world-class harbor at Ise Bay in between them, connected to another large flat hinterland in the Nobi Plain, which enabled a sort of leapfrogging ability for ships early in history to travel between them using the Seto Inland Sea that established early modern Japan's commercial superhighway. It has by far the milder climate in Japan compared to the western Sea of Japan side of Honshu, which gets buried by snow during the winter. And it is also closest to what is arguably the richest fishery in the world, off the coast of eastern Honshu, where the warm Kuroshio and cold Oyashio currents clash together. One of the very few notable cons of the Taiheiyo Belt on the Pacific side of Japan, from a geographic perspective, is that it is also located across the most natural disaster-prone area of Japan as well, which experiences more damaging earthquakes and tsunamis than anywhere else in the country does, due to the locations of the Japanese archipelago's subsurface fault lines and the coastline's exposure to the vast open Pacific on this side. But these natural disasters are sporadic enough that the numerous advantages of concentrating within the Taiheiyo Belt have repeatedly outweighed them across the centuries and been decisive. And that, in a nutshell, is why Japan's population exists where it does today. If you found value in this deep dive, if it made you think differently about geography, population, and the forces that shape where we live, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Infographics, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Understanding the world around us, the physical forces that have shaped human settlement for millennia, helps us understand not just where we are, but why we are there. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.